Every afternoon, he sat on the porch of the mansion overlooking the golden fields of Virginia, as if waiting for something he already knew would never come back. His blue eyes, so proud at family dinners, went blank when the wind blew with the scent of freshly brewed coffee, the same one she used to make. She was just the employee when his father showed up, just a forgotten name in the hallways, an invisible shadow in front of appearances. But in the early hours of the morning, she was the one. Who listened to his secrets, who held his hand as it trembled with fear, who kissed what he hid from everyone, his fragility. But pride and love don't always share the same room, and his silence came at a very high price, one that not all the money in the world could pay. Because love is not what you feel in easy times, it is what you sustain when the world turns its back on you. She loved him in silence, between muffled sighs and averted glances. She loved him without a stage, without a ring, without a photograph. But when he, even trembling inside, introduced her as the employee to her arrogant father, something in her broke, and he didn't even notice. He continued to live surrounded by luxury, status, and promises, until his favorite cup disappeared from the kitchen, until the sheets lost their lavender scent, until the balcony, the same one where he waited for her, became nothing more than an empty stage. It was there that time, with its silent cruelty, began to teach him what he never wanted to hear, that pride is repaid with absence, and that some people, when they leave, take the soul of the house with them. If this story has already caught your attention in the first few seconds, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It makes all the difference in helping more people find stories like this. He was on the porch, again, even though he was old, even more fragile, even though his knees were aching with the arrival of autumn, he was still there, sitting on the same wooden chair, with his eyes fixed on the same golden field. Time did not take away what mattered, and ironically, it was time that taught him that. That porch had been the scene of so many things: muffled laughter, whispered conversations on the phone, requests for silence when his father arrived. Now it was just silence. Silence and longing. The new employees did not even know why their boss insisted so much on that porch, on that specific cup, at that specific time. But the whole house knew. They knew without saying it. Because some absences become presents, and her name, although never spoken again, still hung in the air. She had arrived like many others. Young, discreet, with careful hands, and the way she carried the world on her shoulders without dropping anything. She was just the new employee, that's how she was introduced. But he noticed her, not as someone who observes, but as someone who recognizes. The first exchange of words was about sugar, the second about sleep. And, without realizing it, he began to wait for those conversations like someone waiting for the sunset, always at the same time, always with that feeling that something good was about to happen. And it did. When she smiled, the house smiled with her. When she walked through the living room, the air changed. When he was with her, he felt like she was someone real, not the heir, not the tycoon's son, not the name that appeared in magazines. It was just him. And for some reason, he didn't understand. That was enough. Her father, however, was a constant presence even when he was absent. His shadow was in every room, in every decision, in every gesture that required posture and perfection. Love, in that place, was allowed, as long as it was done in silence. And that was exactly how it started, behind the scenes, among dish towels, freshly ironed sheets, and long glances that no one noticed. He would meet her without making an appointment. She always seemed to know. Sometimes it was just an exchange of words. Other times it was more. It was surrender, it was care, it was tenderness. She would clean his wounds without seeing the blood. He would touch her face as if he were touching something sacred. But he was afraid that someone would see him, kneeling before the truth itself. And then came the tests. Her father announced a visit, a formal dinner, an event that would put the entire house on alert. She, of course, was called to serve, and he froze. Her eyes silently asked him who. She was to him, and his eyes hid. At the cruelest moment, he took a deep breath and said, with the whole world listening, "This is our new employee." The word employee fell like a knife. and she smiled. She smiled like someone who learns to bleed in silence. She served the wine, she served the laughter. She served her own pain on a porcelain plate. And that night, while everyone slept, she put away the cup she always used, and she never came back. The balcony then became an altar. He started going back there every afternoon. At first, he still thought she would show up, that it was just a temporary situation, a punishment, an impulse. But the days turned into months, and the months, silence, and the silence took over, until he understood that what he had done was not just let her go, it was erasing her from the world, and whoever erases someone like that ends up erased too. It was late afternoon when everything happened, when the heat began to hide behind the mountains, and the golden light invaded the kitchen. She appeared, with her hair tied up in a mess, an apron stained with coffee, and that shy smile that asked for nothing. It just existed. It was then that he noticed, not in a grand moment, but in a simple scene. She was rinsing a cup, humming softly, and for the first time he didn't want to leave. He stood there, watching. He pretended to look for something in the fridge, but it was her. It was always her. Their first encounters were small, almost innocent. He would come down early for breakfast just to see her. He would ask unnecessary questions. He would comment on the weather, and she would respond politely, but also with a sparkle in her eyes that could not be faked. They began to laugh at silly things. They began to share trivial secrets, like the fact that she danced alone while cleaning his room, or that he hated being called sir when he only wanted to be him. Intimacy was born from the details, from seeing someone without a mask. Over time, he began to look for her at times when he knew she would be alone. She began to leave an extra cup, even when he was the only one listed at the cafe. They began to create an invisible code between them. He left unsigned notes with compliments hidden in forgotten books around the house. She left dried flowers inside his coat pocket. It was a silent dance, a constant care. And it was in this silent back and forth that the feeling grew, without warning, without permission. The first time he touched her hand was by accident, or so they said. They were in the pantry looking for something. Their hands met. They lingered there too long to be casual, and when they parted, it was as if the ground had shifted. After that, there were more touches, longer, more certain. She didn't run away, but she didn't ask either, and he offered no promises, just presence. It seemed to be enough, until it wasn't. She began to feel the weight of silence. He said it with his eyes, with his gestures, but not with words. And sometimes loving someone in silence is like offering water to someone who is already drowning. She tried not to expect too much, but it was difficult, because the way he looked at her, it wasn't that of a boss. It was that of a man, someone who saw beyond the clothes, beyond the job, and yet, every time a family member approached, she was forced to hide inside. The employees whispered. Some knew, others pretended. But the truth was that the two of them had created a universe just for them. A universe where he was vulnerable and she was whole. But secret universes don't last forever, and she knew it. She was there, living every moment, but with a constant fear of being just a passing story in the life of someone who never had to fight for anything. And then, one night when everything seemed calm, she asked, "Have you told anyone about me?" He hesitated. He lowered his eyes. He said it wasn't the time, that it wasn't easy. And in that moment, she understood that perhaps it never would be. The next night he appeared in the hallway with red eyes, carrying an old book in his hands. It was the same one where she used to hide little notes for him, among the pages marked by sugar and longing. He tried to smile, but his smile no longer had the strength. He was distressed, like someone who feels the house falling apart inside and pretends that everything is standing. She said nothing. She just looked at him. Their silence was too intimate to need words. Then he approached, held her hand as if it were a secret too precious to escape. And there, among the dusty shelves, they kissed for the first time. In a hurry, with fear, with surrender. It was love, but it was also escape. After that, their meetings became more frequent, more intense, more urgent, always out of sight of others. He would call her to the back of the house, to the tool shed, to the car parked in the shade of the fig tree. There was no luxury there. There was truth. She would smile when he took off his shoes and say that only with her could he be himself. She would listen patiently as he talked about his father, about the pressure, about the fear of disappointing the family name. And he, in turn, would listen to her silences, those that carried stories of abandonment, scars of invisibility, the eternal feeling of being second choice in every house where she worked. And that was why that love hurt so much, because for her, he was the first time someone had looked at her with a hunger for her soul, but also perhaps the last. Even so, she gave herself to him. She made his coffee the way he liked it, combed his hair even without a mirror, left his bed made with flowers she picked from the garden, even knowing that his family would never know that the maid's hands were the same ones that touched his heir's pillow. He said that one day he would fix everything, that his father was old, that everything would change. But every time Dad called, he would shrink back. He would go back to being the perfect son, and she would go back to being nobody. The promises began to tire, not because they were false, but because they were always accompanied by postponement. And love postponed hurts, like a toothache that never heals. She began to arrive late in the kitchen. He came to her earlier with anxious looks, and the encounters that had previously brought warmth now had shadows. She began to ask questions. "Are you ashamed of me?" He didn't answer. He said she complicated everything, that things were harder than they seemed, that his life was complicated, but she didn't want a whole life. She just wanted a gesture, just one. One morning, she was cleaning the porch and overheard a conversation. He was on the phone with his father, laughing, saying that the house-cleaning crew was efficient but a little nosy. She stopped. She stood there, motionless, holding the broom as if it were a blunt weapon. When he hung up, he realized she was there. He tried to explain. He said it was just a way to get around his father, that he was playing games, but she already knew. She could already feel it. It wasn't just her father who was erasing her, it was him too. And that night, when he showed up at the utility room for yet another secret tryst, she wasn't there. The next afternoon the house was different, not on the outside. The walls were still white, the gardens were still immaculate, the electric gate still creaked slightly when opened. But on the inside, something was missing. Something that could be heard in the sound of footsteps, the smell of coffee, the silence that remained despite all the noises of the big house. He looked for her at first with feigned naturalness. He opened the doors slowly, looked in the service rooms, asked one of the cooks if the new employee had changed her schedule. The cook hesitated. He said he didn't think she would come back, that he had left an envelope in the pantry with his name handwritten on. That was all. He picked up the envelope as if he were holding an object that might explode. His hands were shaking. His heart was beating fast, as if something was about to be taken away from him forever. He sat on the porch with the letter in his lap, and he didn't open it. Not that day, not the next. As if not reading it was a way of keeping it there for a little longer. But the house had already changed. The routine lost its rhythm. The details stopped happening. No one put brown sugar in his cup anymore. No one left the dish towel smelling of lavender anymore. The curtains no longer had that little adjustment to let the sun hit only his favorite corner. Everything was the same, but nothing was the same anymore. It was in this state of disharmony that his father arrived, without warning, as he did when he wanted to test the employees, show power, impose his presence. He was a man with a tough voice, a dark suit, and a look that judged before listening. When he entered the room, his son was even more hunched over, even more silent. His father commented on the employee's disappearance. He asked if she had done something wrong, and he, on an automatic impulse, replied, "The new employee was absent-minded. She left things out of place." And there, faced with that lie, he felt something inside him crack. At dinner, the usual formality. Folded napkins, lined-up glasses, silence between bites, until his father asked, casually, if there was anyone new on the staff. And then she appeared, not physically, but in the ghost of the question. She was there in that heavy air, and he, pressed, replied coldly, "Nothing relevant, Father. Just another employee who didn't understand her place." Each word was a stab in the back of his neck, but said perfectly. Just the way his father liked it, just the way one would expect from someone who would inherit not only his fortune, but his cynicism. His father smiled. He approved. And it was there, in his father's smile, that he felt ashamed as he had never felt before, ashamed of himself, of his own mouth, of her silence, of the note he had not yet read. He spent the night awake, listening to the sounds of the house, as if he were waiting for the creak of the gate, the soft sound of her footsteps, the popping of the kettle. But there was nothing. Only the clock, only time, only absence. In the morning, he finally opened the envelope. Inside was a short note, a single sentence, written in the handwriting he recognized. With his eyes closed, "I loved you in my place, but you never gave me a place to love you." He pressed his forehead against the paper, feeling a slow, heavy, drawn-out cry. For the first time, it wasn't the employee who was silent. It was him. The following days dragged by like pages that wouldn't turn. He pretended to live. He sat at the table, answered emails, signed documents, maintained his posture in front of his father and his business, but inside, everything was rubble. Her note, that piece of paper that smelled of truth, was never taken out of his shirt pocket, folded carefully as if it were skin. Read 1,000 times, he read it, reread it, tried to understand what to do with it, but he couldn't answer. As if any answer would come too late. He tried to find her. He looked discreetly so that no one would know. He called her old co-workers. He went to the small church where she said she prayed from time to time. No one knew, or they pretended not to know. The town was small, but her silence was greater, a silence that now surrounded him. Her absence was evident in the details, the smell of the bed linen, the taste of the coffee that, even though it was the same, seemed different. The whole house seemed less like a home. The furniture pushed him outside. The porch seemed to mock him. He still sat there every afternoon, as before. But now he didn't expect a reunion. He expected a punishment. One night, he drank more than he should have. He went back to his room and found her pillow still there, tucked away in the back of the closet. He cried, hugging it, as if it were a body he could no longer touch. And in the middle of his tears, he said to himself, "Forgive me. I was afraid. Afraid of losing everything. Afraid of losing my father, his respect, his name." And in a whisper that seemed like an answer, he heard inside himself, "And he lost me." His father, always attentive, began to notice the change. He commented with the arrogance of someone who had never loved anyone. "You're distracted. That's what happens when you get too involved with the lower classes." He didn't answer. He just looked at his father, as if he were watching a stone statue speak. He began to understand where so much fear came from. He began to hate the blood that bound him to that man. But he still didn't have the courage to say it out loud. He still didn't know how to separate himself from the name he carried like a chain. Meanwhile, she built her own silence far away. She didn't send a message. She didn't give a signal. She didn't leave any clues. Because those who learn to be invisible also learn to disappear. And she knew it. She knew he had to lose everything before he could understand what he had. She loved him. She still loved him. But loving someone who hides from you is like planting flowers in the dark. One day they die, even if the love lives on. He started writing letters. He never sent any, but he did write. About the day she walked into the kitchen and the world became clearer. About the perfume she left on his pillow. About regret, about guilt. About the kiss he felt on his lips, even while he was sleeping. He kept all the letters in a wooden box. The same one where his grandfather kept rare coins. Now he was the one who kept the most valuable thing he had, the words he never said. But words are not enough when actions have gone astray. And he knew this. So he began to do something he had never done before. Wait. The days grew. Longer and longer, as if time refused to pass. He was still there in the same house with the same furniture, the same forged routine, but he was a different man. Not that the others noticed. In the mirror, his face was still the same, but inside, something had been corroded. Her absence was no longer a void. It was a painful presence. Every place she had been seemed to call him to a silent judgment, and he let himself be judged, defenseless. Little by little, he began to change, not by a clear decision, but by exhaustion. He stopped going to dinners with his father's friends. He stopped laughing at the lame jokes, smiling for the cameras, pretending to be happy among people who only saw him as an heir. He began to walk around the back of the house. The garden that she had tended with care was now being tended by others, but the plants seemed to miss her. Some had died, others were wilted. He knelt there, on the same ground that she watered with buckets and sweat. And without really knowing what to do, he began to care for the plants with his own hands. For the first time, he got his fingers dirty with soil. For the first time, he understood the weight of what she did in silence. He started going to the market, buying the coffee she used, trying to remember exactly what sugar she preferred. He would stop in front of the shelf and stand there, motionless, trying to guess. He never got it right, because her taste wasn't there. It was in her, and she wasn't there anymore. His father, increasingly impatient, began to pressure him to get back on track. You need a woman who is up to the task, someone with a name. It's time to do something useful with your life. He didn't answer. He didn't argue. He didn't explain himself. He just kept quiet, not out of weakness, but because words were no longer worth anything. His father noticed. He felt his son pulling away, and he reacted as he knew how, harshly. He cut his privileges, removed his positions, humiliated him in front of his partners. But nothing hurt more than the memory of her, so he put up with it, as if that suffering were deserved. Sometimes he thought about leaving, selling everything, changing his name, looking for her. But he gave up, because he didn't know if he deserved to see her again, because he didn't want to appear before her as the man he had been. He wanted to be someone else. He wanted her to look at him and no longer see the coward who was afraid of love, but rather someone who, even late, knew how to learn from pain. So he began to write more letters, and he began to talk about her to strangers. He began to use her name out loud, once, twice, 1,000 times, as if the sound of her name was the only way to keep her alive inside him. And every morning before the sun rose, he would leave her favorite cup on the porch, as if offering a gesture, as if asking for forgiveness without expecting an answer. People noticed. They commented. They said that the tycoon's son was strange, simpler, quieter, that he now walked around watering plants, looking at the sky for hours. But no one knew that each step he took was a silent attempt to fix what he had broken, and that everything, absolutely everything, was about her. It was on a cloudy Sunday that he finally had the courage to open the bottom drawer of his desk, where he still kept everything that had come from her, the dish towels she sewed during her breaks, a simple bracelet forgotten near the bed, the napkin, where she had drawn a heart by mistake during a hurried meal, and there, underneath everything, was the envelope she had left the night she left, not the first one, but the second. He had seen it that morning, but he didn't have the strength to read it. He put it away, as if putting it off was also a way of not accepting it. Her hands were shaking as she opened it. The paper was already yellowed, folded so carefully that he could almost feel her fingers there. The letter was long. She spoke, calmly, without hatred. She said that she knew he loved her, but that love requires courage, that no matter how much she wanted to continue, she couldn't love for two, that it wasn't enough to be the woman of the early hours, of the empty hallways, of the hidden conversations. That, somewhere inside her, there still lived a girl who dreamed of being called mine, out loud, and that she was tired of being the beautiful secret of someone who was ashamed to love. In the end, one sentence. If you ever come looking for me, don't bring flowers. Bring the truth. He had read it so many times that he knew it by heart, and that very day he picked up the keys to the old car she said she loved, a red convertible he never let anyone else drive. He decided he would drive to the last address he had for her. He didn't think about plans, he didn't think about what he would say. He only knew that he could no longer remain silent, motionless, absent. The road was long, but the emptiness was greater. When he got there, he saw a small house with a wooden porch. It was simple but full of details that looked like it. A clothesline with colorful clothes, hanging flower pots, a bicycle leaning against it. But there was no one there. He waited. The neighbor, a white-haired man, appeared with a newspaper under his arm. He asked about her, hesitantly. The man smiled a little sadly. He said that she had moved months ago, that she now lived in another city, working at a school for deaf children. "She's good with gestures. Even when she doesn't speak, she says a lot," the man commented. He thanked him. He got back in the car. But he didn't start the engine. He stood there, staring at the balcony that was no longer hers. And he cried. A calm cry, without shouting. A cry full of acceptance. Because she was alive. Well, starting over. But without him. And for the first time, he understood that love also means setting free. On the way back, he stopped at a lookout point. The wind was blowing. Hard. The sky was clear now, and there, with wet eyes, he wrote his last letter. Not to her, but to himself. A letter where he promised to never love with fear again. Where he promised to be whole, even if it hurt. Where he said in so many words, what he had never had the courage to say, "She was the best of me, and I lost her trying to please someone who never loved me." When he returned, the house seemed even emptier. Not because there were fewer people. The servants continued to circulate. The appointments continued to be on the agenda. His father was still demanding, but because his soul no longer fit there. The house was too big for someone who now only wanted to fit in the simplicity of a sincere look. Every day when he returned, he went straight to the porch. He spent hours there with the same cup, even without coffee, and little by little that space became a ritual, as if that corner held the only memory that still warmed him. He sat down at the same time she used to serve. Coffee, with the idiotic hope that the wind would blow away the scent of the past. Sometimes he closed his eyes and listened to the sound of her footsteps. He wanted to believe that there was still time, but the truth is that it was already late. Over time, he began to talk to himself, not loudly, but in whispers, as if she were still nearby. Sometimes he would apologize. Other times, he would tell her about his day. He would comment on what had changed in the garden. He would say that he had learned how to water the plants, that he had discovered how brown sugar dissolves better at the bottom of the cup. And one of those days, he confessed quietly, "You made everything feel right." After that, he cried silently. An adult cry, without fanfare, that only those who have lost what matters can understand. The people in the house noticed. One of the gardeners commented to the new employee, "He's different. He seems more like a man now, less like an heir, more like a person." She just nodded. Everyone knew something had happened, but no one knew her name. He never said it again, as if saying it would be a desecration, as if that name were both an altar and a wound at the same time. He began to isolate himself. He avoided meetings with his partners, family lunches, and any conversation that did not involve silence. Until one day, the housekeeper found an open notebook on the library table. It was the notebook where he wrote his letters. But this time, it was blank. And with a pen on the page, there were only 2 words. She left. It was the final point that he didn't know how to give, but that life had already given him. On a random Saturday, without announcing it, he began to donate things from the house. He had the old paintings, the expensive tapestries, the silverware removed. He wanted to empty it, but not the space, the weight. Little by little, the palace became simpler, and he became lighter. The only thing that hadn't changed was the balcony. The cup was still there, as a reminder, as a silent promise that if time didn't bring it back, at least it would give it some meaning. And then, for the first time, he wrote to her, but not to be sent, only to be read there, with the wind as witness. "I loved you like a boy scares a bird for fear of losing it. Today I'm just a man learning to live with empty hands." He couldn't say what had moved him that morning. Maybe it was the dream he'd had. One of those dreams you can't remember, but that leaves a taste of absence when you wake up. Or maybe it was the sound of an old song playing on the kitchen radio. The fact is that, on impulse, he decided to really look for her. Not just remember her, not just wait for fate to punish him, but look for her. For the first time, with an open heart, without excuses, without justifications. He wanted to see her, even if it was to hear that she had moved on, even if it was to confirm that it was too late. He went to the town where his neighbor had said she had moved. A small town surrounded by trees and the sounds of children playing in the distance. He didn't know anyone there. He walked slowly through the streets, not knowing where to start. He asked about her with trepidation, showing her an old photo he had on his cell phone hidden in an unnamed folder. Most people shook their heads. Others hesitated, until a lady, sitting at the door of a modest school, looked at the photo for a while and said, "I think that's the new teacher. She works there with the special children. She's sweet, very dear." His heart raced. He thanked her with a wave, crossed the street and stood in front of the school gate. He waited for the bell. The children ran away, happy. And then, in the midst of the commotion, she appeared. Different, lighter. Her hair was shorter, her gaze more steady. She walked among the little ones as if she belonged to that world. There was peace on her face, and he, standing behind a tree, watched, his chest tight, his eyes filled with tears. He wanted to run to her, but he didn't, because in that moment he understood. She had found her own place, one where she was no longer shadow, where she was no longer silence. He walked back to the car, his heart shattered, not with pain but with truth. He sat in the driver's seat and cried again, but this time the tears weren't of guilt. They were of acceptance, because the love he felt for her was still there, but now it was clean, free. He knew he could scream her. Name, beg for forgiveness, promise a different world. But she didn't need that anymore, and maybe he didn't either. Before he left, he wrote one last letter. He folded it carefully and placed it in a small cardboard box, along with her cup, which he still kept as a relic. He left it at the school entrance with a simple note. "To the woman who taught me what love is, even when I only knew how to pretend to be a man. She asked them to deliver it only if she wanted it." And she left, without looking back. On the road he felt something different. It wasn't lightness, it was something else. Something that felt like peace but hurt. Something that felt like an end, but was actually a beginning. He knew he would never forget. But he also knew that from that moment on, loving in silence would no longer be an option, because the silence that protected him also destroyed him. And she was the most beautiful echo that silence ever had. The following days were filled with echoes. The image of her walking among the children remained in his eyes, like a portrait that no one can erase. He returned home as if he were returning to a place that no longer shelters him. The mansion was the same. The hallways still had the muffled sound of the servants' footsteps. His father still imposed himself with a firm voice and strong opinions, but he was no longer the same son who needed approval to exist. He no longer wanted applause. He wanted peace. The morning after she returned, she woke up before sunrise. She made her own coffee, just the way she liked it, even though she had never learned how to make it properly. She placed the cup on the table on the porch and sat there, listening to the wind. For the first time in a long time, she took a deep breath without rushing. She remembered the letter she had left at school. She didn't know if she had read it. She didn't know if she had received it. But for the first time, it didn't matter. What needed to be said had already been delivered. And he knew her time was no longer his. His father called him to talk that same day. He said he intended to divide the assets early, that he wanted to see the family name grow before he left. He offered him control of the companies, control of everything, a living will. But he refused, calmly. He said he was grateful, but that he had other plans. The father, perplexed, laughed scornfully. "Plans? What plans do you have, living like a gardener in that huge house with no heirs, no wife, no legacy?" He simply replied, Perhaps the greatest legacy is not to repeat your mistakes. It was the first time he had said it out loud, the first time he had not trembled before his father's authority. His father did not react. He simply turned his back, and he did not need anything else. No fight, no confrontation, just silence. A mature, firm, free silence. In the days that followed, he decided to transform the house. Not with renovations, but with gestures. He had the windows that were always closed opened. He planted new flowers in the garden, the same ones she had lovingly tended. He painted the walls of the hallway in soft tones, and he created a library in the guest room, filled with the books she loved, the ones he had read after she left. It was as if, little by little, he was transforming that space into something closer to her. Not so that she would come back, but so that her love would continue to live on, even in her absence. A month later, a letter arrived. No return address. But he recognized the handwriting immediately. It was hers. One page, simple, to the point. I received the cup, and I smiled. I remained silent because silence is also an answer. But I want you to know, it hurt. A lot. But it passed, and I became stronger because of it. You also seem to have changed, and for that thank you. It took me time to understand that love, when true, does not destroy us. It transforms us, and pain teaches us. He read it slowly, letting each word sink in. Then he folded the paper carefully and placed it inside the cup, in the center of the library shelf. He didn't cry. He didn't smile. He just breathed. Because some letters don't need a reply. They're full stops that don't hurt. They just close the right chapter. The seasons changed without him noticing. The balcony began to glow differently in the mornings, a soft warmth that did not come from the sun, but from within. He now woke up early, no longer out of melancholy, but out of habit. He made coffee, watered the plants, read a passage from a book and wrote short sentences in loose notebooks, as if he were still talking to her. But it was no longer pain, it was memory. And memory, when accepted, becomes a garden. The father, increasingly absent in presence and lucidity, was diminishing over time. The business was left to his brothers. He no longer wanted numbers, meetings, or status. He preferred his hands dirty with dirt, the stories he heard from his neighbors, the long silences he filled with deep breathing. Every now and then he received visitors, some from young people who worked on the family foundations, others from strangers who just came to listen to his stories. And in all these conversations, there was always a line, a seed, a trace of her. Not that he mentioned her all the time, but she was in everything, in the way he spoke about kindness, in the way he served coffee, in the patience with which he listened to others. One rainy afternoon, he found a small old box at the bottom of his wardrobe. Inside were the first letters he had never had the courage to send. He read them all one by one. They were raw, fragile words, full of desperate sincerity. But in the end, he smiled, because the man who had written those letters no longer existed. He had died little by little as the other was being born, the man who had learned to love without hiding it, who understood that courage is not shouting it from the rooftops, but holding on to a feeling even when faced with judgment. He then decided to write one last letter, not to her, but to himself, the man he had before, the one who had hesitated, who had been silent, who had been ashamed. He wrote firmly, "You were afraid, but now I'm not anymore. And even if I never see you again, I carry you with me in everything I do. You taught me to be someone who doesn't hide." In late autumn, he did something symbolic. He built a small bench in the garden, facing the porch. It was made of light wood, with a hand-engraved detail. Just one word, true. There he sat every afternoon, not waiting for her to return, but honoring everything she had left behind. Because sometimes love doesn't come back with steps. It comes back with roots. And he felt that somehow she was still there. In the sound of the leaves, in the smell of lavender, in the warmth of the sun that beat down softly, like her touch on the back of his neck, long ago. And when someone passed by and asked him why he spent so much time there, he would just smile, and he would answer, "It's the most beautiful place in the house." And it was, because it was the only corner where he could be whole, even after having lost everything he considered essential. It was a cold morning, with a white sky and no rush, that he woke up with a strange feeling in his chest. Not pain, not joy, just a melancholic lightness, like someone who knows something has closed up inside. He got up slowly, made coffee in the usual silence, and took the cup to the porch. The garden was clean, the wooden bench intact, the flowers growing as if she was still taking care of everything from a distance. He sat down, as always, but this time there was no letter, no note, no specific memory. It was just him, the wind, and the certainty that something inside him had finally found rest. That morning he decided to go for a walk. He went to the local market, bought fruit, talked to his neighbors, laughed at a bad joke. He was an ordinary man now. No luxury, no rush, no status. And that was good for him. He stopped in front of a used bookstand and picked up a copy with a worn cover. It was a novel about loss and reunion. He leafed through it without thinking, but stopped at an underlined page. The sentence read, "Sometimes the ones we love save us just by leaving us." He closed the book and took it with him. He paid with small bills and thanked him with his eyes. When he got home, he went straight to the library. He put the book on the shelf, among the ones she would have loved, and then he stayed there for a while just looking at the colorful spines. Each title had a piece of her. It was as if she still chose the order of the books. And maybe that was true. Maybe the love he didn't know how to protect at the right time had found another way to remain. Lighter, more mature. That night, he did something he had never done before. He wrote his father. A short letter. Not to confront, but to let go. He told him he forgave, that he understood the fear his father had projected onto everyone around him, that he had become the man he was not in spite of his father, but because of everything he had had to overcome in silence. He folded the letter and put it in the mailbox, not knowing if it would be read, because sometimes forgiveness doesn't have to be received, it just has to be given. The next day he received an unexpected visitor. A boy of about 9 years old with a backpack on his back stood at the gate. He said he was the son of the teacher from the neighboring town. She had mentioned him once by chance, and the boy, curious, wanted to meet the man on the porch. The man greeted him with a smile and went inside to make 2 glasses of lemonade. As the boy ran around the garden, he watched him with a tenderness he didn't know he had. When the boy asked why the garden bench had truth written on it, he replied, "Because it was here that I discovered what she really is." That night, before going to sleep, she didn't write anything. She didn't need to. She just closed her eyes and felt. And what she felt was not absence but presence, a kind of presence that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, doesn't charge, one that remains silent, as she used to do. It was early spring when everything changed without fanfare. The garden was in bloom, the porch was clean, and he was sitting as always with the cup in his hands. He no longer expected anything. He just felt. The longing no longer hurt. It had become company. Time had shaped him. Like water shapes stone, slowly, quietly, but deeply. He no longer saw himself as a victim nor as guilty. He was simply a man who had learned, late, but with truth. On that particular afternoon, the wind carried a different scent. Lavender, soft, familiar, impossible to ignore. He lifted his face and closed his eyes. For a moment, he felt that she was there. Not in form, but in essence. He smiled slightly, his eyes filling with tears. When he opened his eyes, he saw something curious at the gate. A young woman with loose hair, firm eyes, and a serene walk was carrying a small cloth bag and a book clutched to her chest. She looked at the house with strangeness and respect. He stood up slowly and walked towards her, curious and with his heart racing for a name that still pulsed inside him. She introduced herself with a shy smile. "Sorry to barge in like this. My name is Claire. My mother asked me to come here in case one day I wanted to understand what love is in silence." He froze. Time stopped. His hands were shaking, but not from fear. They were shaking with recognition. She continued, holding out the book. This was her notebook. I couldn't open it for years, but yesterday I opened it, and I found things that spoke of you, of this balcony, of this bench. He took the book gently. It was the same model he had given her as a gift, back in the first months when they shared coffee and secret confessions. It was worn, but lovingly preserved. They sat on the garden bench. He couldn't speak, he could only listen. Claire said that her mother spoke little about the past, but always with a sweetness that left clues. And now, after finishing college and choosing to follow the same path of raising children as her mother did, she felt she needed to understand why that place called to her so much. He opened the notebook reverently. The first few pages were simple: recipes, drawings, scribbles. But in the middle, among pressed flowers and hand-sewn envelopes, were letters that had never been sent. One of them began, "If one day my daughter comes to you, it will be because time has healed what pride has wounded." He cried, not in pain, but in gratitude. Claire watched him silently, as if she already knew that this encounter was more hers than his. They spent the afternoon together. They talked about school, about her mother, about the silences that build and those that destroy. He showed her the garden, told her stories, pointed to the cup he always left on. The table, she smiled. Lavender, just like her scent. And without asking, she got up and picked some flowers to place on the wooden bench. When she finished, she ran her fingers over the engraved word, "true." Then she looked at him and said, "I think that's what she wanted to show me, that to truly love is to continue caring, even after." Before leaving, Claire hugged him, long, warm, like only those who are in no hurry can hug him. And with her eyes shining, she said, "She forgave you so long time ago, but she needed you to forgive yourself too." When she left, the garden seemed to breathe. The wind blew again, and this time it brought warmth. The sun shone through the leaves of the trees more gently, and he, standing on the porch, understood. Life had turned around, but not to punish him, but to teach him. She had loved in silence. He had learned in silence. But love, when it is true, finds a way to come back. Not always in the same form, but always with the same scent. His, voice breaking, he whispered to the wind, "You came back. Somehow, you came back." And for the first time in many years, he entered his house and closed the door with peace in his heart. If this story touched your heart, leave a like now. It helps us continue bringing you real, deep and moving stories. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the next ones. And comment below, "Silent love also leaves roots. Your voice matters." And now, watch the video that's appearing on the screen. It has an even stronger twist, and maybe you'll see yourself in it.